today. So hopefully everyone is ready and we're all online and we'll get started. Now the topic for today was to look at the population risk adjustment that's done to the quality indicators. And we know that the quality indicators that I'm speaking of are the 35 QIs. Please also note that these 35 QIs are the ones that appear on the Ontario or the Health Quality Ontario webpage, which, as you probably know already, is a public webpage that any citizen in the country can log into that webpage and they can see the quality indicator scores that you're using. And your CIHI reports that you receive every quarter are also these same 35 QIs. Now, what I'd like to do before we get into the risk adjustment part of it is I've logged into my CIHI webpage, which you probably recognize if you're using the CIHI webpage. And I'm going to click on eReports. So this is the area right here under eReports. And when I do that, it's going to take me to this screen. And I can look at any one of a number of different types of reports. But the main one I look at is the organizational reports. So I'm going to click on this. Now, this is a little bit of a strange function that CIHI has. But once I click on this, I have to click also here to get into where the reports are. So I'm just going to click on that. And I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. And you can see there are 7 different types of reports I can look at. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to go into the quality indicator reports. And these first 2 sets of reports, this is where the data is broken down over 8 quarters. And this is where the data is broken down year on year. And then these are the 35 QIs, and these are the 24 QIs. So for today, I'm going to pick the quarterly report, and I want the 35 QIs. Now, the next thing I need to do is pick whatever it is I want to look at. Do I want to look at a province, a particular LHIN, a particular company like Extended Care or Revera or whatever it happens to be? Do I want to look at a particular sector, hospital or nursing home, by facility size, urban versus rural, or a particular home? So I'm going to go with facility because that's what we're doing today. And we've permission from Strathmere to show their data. So let's just type in Strathmere's master number, which I believe is 4546. If I haven't mistaken it. No, I did mistake it. So let's try Strath. And there we are, 4645. I'm dyslexic. So you can see I've selected that particular home. Now you could select all homes and you'll get the quality report for every home in the province. But we're just going to take this one home, Strathmere, and then we go on to the next section. You can see I'll click Run Report. And then it says, do you want data broken down by these different areas? And since we're looking at facilities, you have to pick facility. Okay, I never use this parameter to run the CIHI report. And let's just run this. And CIHI pops up showing us the data for this particular home. Now, what I want you to notice here is that the, sorry, let me just, is that it shows you exactly what type of data for what type of setting. So this is a residential setting, and these are adjusted. So these scores are already population risk adjusted, and you can see them right here. This is the most recent quarter for CIHI, and you can see the percentage, and then these are the prior 7 quarters, going back to 2015 quarter 4. So the data goes all the way back to 2015 quarter 4, and you can see the change in scores over time. For example, we know that worsened late loss ADLs, the bed eating, toilet eating, and transfer, is a very important score for the Ministry of Health. And you can see where people have had a decline. Well, originally in 2015, we were experiencing a 13% decline, 13.8, 14.8, 17. And as time's gone on, you can see that our decline for people with worsened late loss ADLs of quarter over quarter has gone up considerably over that period of time, which is showing us that the people are more and more complex over those periods of time, because these are the major areas for funding, of course, bed eating, toileting, and transfer, and you can see how the scores change over time. Now, this is with the population risk adjustment in. Let's see if it changes if we just use the unadjusted raw score. Notice that that went to 29.8. So let me go back again to the adjusted score, 28.9. But actually what they experienced in the home was 29.8. So you see that the unadjusted score, the actual data, and when I say actual, let's pretend there's 100 people, and this number right here is telling me that approximately 30 out of 100 people had a decline in their late loss ADLs. That's the true score. If we then click here and look at the statistically adjusted score, by clicking here, it says it's not 30 people, but it's 29 people, or 28.9. Okay? So notice that the adjusted score does not match to the actual or true score for your facility. And that's something that you really need to look at. Now, sometimes this works in your favor, as it did here. And you're probably asking yourself, why would it drop by one person like that? Well, the reason it would be adjusted down is because the other factors that the algorithm looks at says that this home had people who had a higher risk value than the average in the province. And because they started off with higher risk people, we're going to give them a little bit of a bonus, if you want to look at it that way. And I'm being quite glib when I say that, okay? So here you see, let's look at the unadjusted score now for the next item, the 33.2%. Do you see it drops to 30% on the unadjusted? So improvement in mid-loss ADLs, they're saying it's 30 out of 100 people is the true score. But when you adjust that score, they're saying your improvement rate really is 33 people out of 100. Well, and again, that's being very loose, okay, because we're talking about percentages here. So you see in both these cases, the adjustment score actually favored the home. It made them look better than what they actually were. And that's fair because they're handling people who have a higher risk of problems. Okay, so please remember that when you go in, you will look at both of these numbers. The adjusted is with the population risk done, and the unadjusted is what actually happened right from the raw data or your true score. Okay, this is a theoretical score. This is a true score. So that's how, and it's the adjusted score that gets published on Health Quality Ontario. So let's just look at a few more here. So you see it's saying 14% of your residents improved if you had 100 beds, okay? It says 14 of your residents improved, but let's look what happens when I adjust it. It says 24% of the residents improved. Now that's amazingly different, isn't it? It's nearly 10 points different. It's 33% better off with the adjustment. So this particular home is getting lots of benefits from the fact that there's this risk adjustment within the scores. Okay, now it may hurt them in other places because sometimes the risk adjustment makes it look like you've got more of a problem than your real problem based upon the risk profile of the residents in your building. So I hope that's understandable to everybody. And that's how you run the CIHI report. Remember, I just logged into CIHI. I clicked on e-reports, and then it brought me to the reporting page where I was able to see the numbers. And this is pretty fantastic because you're really comparing yourself, to 600 plus other homes within the province. Now, just another quick report to get a little better sense of the home. This is looking at the same data. Again, this is the Q3 of 2017, the most recent data. And you can see here that the graph is showing the ministry average relative to this particular home's average. And you can see for delirium factors, this home is experiencing residents where 33% of the residents are experiencing delirium. And the provincial average is around 13%. So you can see already from a risk point of view with these delirium symptoms, what that would mean. Antipsychotics, there's a 26% utilization of antipsychotics compared to the province at 19 or 20%. So higher than the province for antipsychotics, much higher than the province for the symptoms of delirium. You can see fall rates and physical restraint use. And here in the home, you're looking at 26.5% of residents have a daily physical restraint. So remember, that's daily physical restraint. But the provincial average is closer to 5%. You can see people experiencing pain, 21% noted, whereas the experiencing pain provincially is around 5%. So that type of a report gives you a sense immediately of where you're at with the particular indicators compared to whatever the current is for the provincial average. And you can get those numbers simply by going to CIHI, run that same report that I ran, but for the whole province instead of for a particular facility, and then run it for your facility, and you've got the ability to compare yourself. Okay, so those are the negative outcomes. If we look at the worsened outcomes, sorry, let me go back one. You can see here that the mid-loss, worsened ADL, symptoms of depression, and again, it shows you the same pattern here where the home exceeds the provincial average on these particular indicators. One more quick report is the improvement indicators. And here you can see that there also percentage of residents who've improved in status is higher for this home than it is for the province in many of these indicators. So this province has a very high risk population. However, they are still experiencing high rates of improvement that exceeds the performance for the Ministry of Health. And this is a 160 bed home. So it's quite a large home. And remember, when you're looking at this data, it's always 1 year of data. So you have to remember it's always a full year of data. So here we're looking at approximately 700 plus records, nearly 800 records of data over the entire year. And you can see it's showing that this home in many areas exceeds the province for improvement. But again, they're a very high risk population. So that's why when we saw the risk adjustment, it was favoring the home. It was saying you have a very high risk population and you're receiving a certain outcome. However, you get a bonus on that outcome because of the fact that your residents were high risk. So I hope that helps us to understand that a bit better. One more report I'll show you is this one, and then we'll quickly go on to the population risk adjustment. You can see here where this report shows you the difference between the province, and this black line is the province, and what percentage you exceed the provincial average. So if you remember the daily physical restraints, relative to the province, you're 441 times more likely to have a restraint than it would be on average in the province. You're 300 times more likely to have pain than experienced in the province. You're 151 times more likely to experience delirium factors than the provincial average. And you can see so far where you line up relative to the provincial number. So that's the kind of things that these indicators can show us. And what we need to do is get over to our presentation for today. Now, the risk adjustment methodology, let's look at what it actually does. Now, it says here, it's put in place to enable a fair and more appropriate comparison. Okay, we want to know about things that happen in your home, and we want to know how are you providing care relative to the risk level of the people that you're bringing into your home. So it adjusts for specific resident characteristics that are beyond the facility's control. Okay, and they help to level the playing field by comparing apples to apples when you're comparing one home to the province or to other homes within the province. So that's the purpose of the risk adjustment. But we're going to take 3 steps in order to do this population risk adjustment. So we're going to calculate the quality indicator, and we're going to calculate it in 3 different ways. The first way is what was the true score within your facility, the unadjusted quality indicator. Then we're going to calculate the theoretical score within your home. Sorry. Hello. Then we're going to calculate the theoretical level based upon a study that InterRAI did. And you can see here, we call that calculate the expected QI right here. And then we're going to calculate the provincial number. So all of these things are going to get calculated 3 different times. So for each risk group in the facility, the observed or unadjusted QI score is divided by the expected score. And you're going to see that in a moment, that we're going to take what's the predicted rate for that quality indicator, and we're going to compare it to what your actual rate is, okay? And so the risk adjustment QI scores from each risk group, and we're going to build these risk groups, which I'll show you in a moment. All right, so let's just move on to that. These are the quality indicators. You can see there are the improvement indicators, there's the decline indicators, and then there's the negative outcomes. And then we're going to stratify some data. Now, I know this is going to get a bit hairy in a moment. It was for me. And to some extent, it still is for me. But let's see if we can follow this through. When we stratify data, we don't want to calculate your fall rate or your continence rate for the whole facility. We want to put them within different risk groups. And we call this the stratification of data. One example is the ADL long score. Now remember what that ADL long, it goes from 0 to 28. And it goes from 0 to 28. It measures early loss ADLs, mid loss ADLs, and the late loss ADLs. And so, according to the ministry, if your score on that ADL is from 0 to 9, then you're in a low risk group. Okay, low risk for ADLs. That's what we're talking about. Okay, if your score's from 10 to 23, you're in a medium risk group, and from 24 to 28, you're in a high risk group. So that's one of the variables that we can do a stratification on. There are other variables that are used for different quality indicators. We have the CPS score, which has these ranges for low, medium, and high risk, the pain scale, the depression scale, and your actual CMI or your CMI grouping. Okay, so we're going to have to take your population when we calculate a particular quality indicator, and then we're going to stratify that number of people within these low, medium, and high groups. And hopefully this will become clearer as I go through here. So what are we going to be doing at the beginning? Well, we're going to do an example here. I'm going to take one of the quality indicators. This one's called decline in continence, okay, bladder continence. So I'm going to do an example. First of all, let's calculate it for your facility. Well, that's very simple. How many people had a decline in their bladder continence? That is, they went from a score of 2 to a score of 4, let's say. So how many people had that? How many people could have declined in their bladder continence without any of the exclusion factors? And then we just divide one by the other and multiply by 100. And we're all familiar with this. How many people did it happen to? How many people could have happened to? Gets the proportion. Then we multiply it by 100 to get the percent. Very straightforward. This is the unadjusted quality indicator. Now, we need to be able to stratify that into these, what proportion are in the low ADL long score, what percentage of people are in the medium ADL long score, what percentage of people are in the high ADL score. And again, this shows you what the items are for the ADL long form. Okay, mobility, transfer, locomotion, dressing, eating, toileting, and hygiene. So now that we've got that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the theoretical score. Recall that I said that Intereye came up with a way of, if they don't know your decline in bladder continence, they can guess it from other information. So they're going to use this other information to guess what your score should be. And they did this by having millions of records of data. And there's 5 variables that they're going to try to predict your worsened bladder continence from. They're going to try to use what's called the PSI scale, the Personal Severity Index scale, where they're diagnostically related items. There's also the PSI scale where there's non-diagnostic related items, and we'll look at those in a minute. There's the cognitive performance scale. They're going to use that to guess what your worsened continence would be. And there's your CMI score and whether or not you're younger than 65. So they're going to use these 5 different variables in order to guess at what your worsened bladder would be, okay? So let's start off and see what is PSI-1. PSI-1 looks at your age. Are you over 90? It looks at whether or not your bowel continence was 2, 3, or 4 on the scale, right? It looks at J5A. Remember, the conditions look at instability. If you're experiencing acute episodes, do you have end-stage disease? Weight loss, do you have pressure ulcers? Do you have stasis ulcers? And is your overall health status declined since the last assessment? So for each of these factors, you're going to get a point. And you can see here that we total 9 different items altogether. If you had all 9 of them, obviously your score would be 9. If you had none of them, then your score would be 0. So that's the first scale. The second scale is very similar. Again, we're going to look at over 90, or 90 or over, I should say. But now we're going to use your cognitive skills, whether or not you have periods of lethargy, understanding other people, can you transfer, can you locomote, can you eat, what's your hygiene like? Do you have mood indicators such as repetitive verbalization or recurrent statements? And again, you're going to get a score that goes from 0 to 9 on that scale. And then we're going to look at the cognitive performance scale as a covariate, and we know what that is, goes from 0 to 6. We're going to look at the RUG hierarchy score, which goes from 0.63 up to 194. And we're also going to look at age at assessment. So we're going to calculate these total scores within each of the stratifications that we looked at. So remember, we've already calculated the raw true score. Then we're going to calculate this theoretical score for you. And here I give an example of what that might look like if you were trying to guess income. Okay, and so it's the same idea as this. If I know how old you are, and I know you're a male, and I know your education level, then I can guess what your income is. All right, and this is the exact same idea with these. It's saying if I know your PS1 score, your PS2 score, your CPS score, your RUG CMI, and your age, then I can guess what your level of incontinence is, okay? Or whether or not what your proportion of people who have worsened incontinence. So they're going to use that theoretical model in order to guess. Now, let's begin looking at what happened. So when they took that theoretical model and they used what's called regression to find out what's the impact of each variable, you can see that we're going to use the ADL long score as our stratification variable. And we're going to say, what's the weighting that these items here have within that? And you can see here that in the low group, it reduces your theoretical score because it's -3 times your theoretical score, and your score would go from 0 to 9. You can see here that this would increase your score, but not by a lot. You can see here that the PS2 will increase your score. A higher CPS would also increase your score. A higher CMI would increase your score, right? Or your likelihood of having worsened bowel incontinence. And then if you're younger than 65, it reduces your score, which makes sense as well. So if you're younger than 65, you're going to get a credit. You're less likely to have worsened bowel or bladder incontinence. Now that's for people in the low risk group of ADL. Then they look at the people in the medium group and they get the covariates to guess your score. And you can see here that there are keen differences. And then for people in the high risk group, you can see that it's even more significant, that these values will actually adjust your score up higher, or say you're more likely to have a worsened bladder continence. All right. Now then we're going to take the facility average score, and you can see here again we're going to look at it, and we actually in this example we've calculated the averages. So these are the raw averages within your facility. Okay, so if you're in the low risk ADL, your average score for PS1 is 0. If you're in the medium, your average score is a 7, okay? So these are the values that we get within those different groups. Now let's go to the next one. And you can see here that the 3 ways we're calculating these QIs. And we're going to go and look at the actual example for bladder. Now in this particular home, 83 people had worsened bladder continence. That is, their score went from a lower score to a higher score on that one item. The number of people who were at risk are 486, so the home had a percentage of 17. The provincial number was 18,000 people actually experienced worsened bladder continence. 122,000 people could have experienced, and the provincial rate is 15%. Now remember, these are true scores. These are the actual scores without any kind of an adjustment at all. Now let's take a look at the risk level based on your ADL score. And remember, we put those values in. So here we're looking at the numerator denominator within each of these factors, not the overall home, but within the risk groups. So if you're low risk from 0 to 9 on the ADL long, then 22 out of 214 people, 36 out of 206 people, 25 out of 66 people. And notice that the risk level goes up the higher your risk level is for the ADL group. So you have 10% of your people are here, 17% of your people are here, 37% of your people are here. And that gives us that overall 17% of people who had the worsened bladder continence. If we look at the province, how does it break out by ADL score? And you can see here that it's around 10, and here it's 10. So you're pretty close for the low risk people. For the province, it's around 19, and you can see you're about 18. So you're again very close within these two groups. But notice when there's high risk people in your home, the high risk people have 38% compared to the provincial average of 22%. All right, and so the provincial overall average was 15, as we saw. Now, the one calculation we haven't done is the theoretical. So we still need to do the theoretical one. And I apologize a little bit here. This is called a logit model. It's the regression model for calculating the scores. I'm not going to go through the whole thing and what's the basis of it, but we're taking those weights that we calculated before for each of the different levels of ADL, and then we're calculating the theoretical percentages, okay, based on PSI1, PSI2, CPS, CMI, and age. And we do that at all three levels again. And then we use this really long exponential formula, and we're going to calculate a 0.1 for the low risk people. This is theoretical value now. 0.27 for the medium risk ADL, and 0.2 for the high risk. So now we've got the theoretical, the provincial, and we've got your average. Let's now do the calculation for the theoretical. We're going to take what it was in your home, the observed QI, 10, 17, and 10, 18, and 38. This is the expected values now, the theoretical from those millions of records. 10, 27, 20. Notice that, again, at this high-risk group of people, this home is quite a high relative to the province and relative to the theoretical. They're saying you should only have 20% of people given the risk level, and here you actually got 38% of your people. And I'm not sure what just happened there. Okay, apologize. Let me get back to that. Hopefully you all still have my screen. Okay, so here now is the observed within your home compared to the expected within your home. And I seem to have lost. For some reason, I seem to have lost my, oh, sorry, guys. I apologize for that. Okay, hopefully we're back here. Now, this is what your home experienced within the 3 levels of ADL. This is what the theory says you should have experienced based on your PSI, CPS scores, and what have you. So I divide that number into that number to get the ratio. All right, this is becoming very annoying. I divide that number into that number to get the ratio. Notice that if you're above 1, that means that your likelihood is higher than the theoretical. If you're below 1, as it is for the medium group, that means you're less likely than the theoretical. And here you can see we're almost double the theoretical. So 1.89 is the ratio. So nearly twice as more occurrences within our facility as what the theory would have suggested. Now this is the province's number here. So remember they had 0.09. We're going to multiply that number by this ratio, okay, to get the adjusted QI. So here, if we multiply 1.02 by 0.99, we get this number. And here we get this number, and here we get that number, okay? So this is the adjusted score. Notice that for this high-risk group, it's saying the adjustment would take you higher. So you'd go from 38% to 41%, okay? However, in the medium risk group, you're going to go from 17% to 12%. And in the low risk group, you're going to go from 10% and you're going to stay around 10%. Okay, so that's how they use the 3 different factors to get to your adjusted score. Now we're going to weight out those scores because we're going to weight them by how often this happens within the province. Okay, so we're going to weight this out by how often it happens in the province. So let's take these adjusted scores down here, and then we say how often does this happen in the province, right? So 0.42 are in the 0 to 9 range. So when we when we multiply it, that gets reduced from 10% down to 4%. Here, it only occurs at 50.5 proportionately within the province, within that group. That reduces your score to 0.06. And this one rarely happens. Look at that. This is 0.5, 0.42. This is 0.06. So it's going to really knock that high adjusted score down to 0.02 from 0.41. And then when you add these up, you get the adjusted score, both adjusted for the population or the province, for the theoretical, as well as the likelihood of occurrence within the province. And you can see your final number is 0.13. So you started off by having an actual 17% of residents with worsened bladder. But by the time we go through all the math, we've adjusted it, and it says we're going to give you a score of 13%. Okay, so that's the population risk adjustment and how it works within the province of Ontario. So I know I've gone over. I really appreciate that you've bore with me through this, and that's it. I guess we've done all of our sessions. One of the things I was thinking of in the new year is I'd like to do a session based upon looking at the CIHI reports and understanding how to run e-reports and interpret e-reports. Please, if that's of interest to people, can you send us an email letting us know you'd like to go through a training session on running your CIHI reports and interpreting those reports. Thank you all for your patience. Bye-bye.